Do we have any questions for Peter Kurti on either religious liberty or hard multiculturalism?
One of the fun things about working in a think tank, which is where I spend most of my time, I work in a parish on Sundays. One of the things is that in fact I have to get my ideas around my colleagues as well, and we do have some interesting discussions. So disagreement goes with the turf. So please don't feel you're being rude if you disagree.
My question is, do you think that cultural Christians have anything to offer Christianity or Western civilization?
What do you mean by cultural Christians?
So somebody who doesn't necessarily have a faith, but who respects and appreciates the contribution that Christianity has made to Western civilization.
The contribution they can make is to say that, and to keep saying it, and to stand up for that contribution that they believe undergirds Western civilization. We need to say these things. And there are some people who are saying this a lot. Kevin Donnelly is somebody who writes about this a great deal. And I think there is a growing awareness that, in fact, the Western civilization that some people in our country despise, but others value, but take for granted, that needs to be defended. So keep at it.
Thank you.
Yes, Peter, you said that with the decline of religious observance in a country, the state steps in to prop up the virtues. I'm just wondering, in regards to, Australia doesn't have a national charter of human rights, but do you think such a national charter has potential to stem the tyranny of tolerance, or can it be used the other way?
I'll take the second part of your question first, if I may. I think a national Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights would be the worst thing for us to do, because then we'll have activist judges interpreting that and imposing new obligations on citizens. So I'm not in favour of a written Charter of Rights at all. The point that the first part of your question, what I was really saying was that, I'm going to put this bottle down rather than waving it around. What I was saying was that the standards of community behaviour, let's say, standards of the way in which people go about forging relationships with one another, those standards were set in many community organisations. And as the bonds of those associations weaken, and I think the decline in religious observance is a part of that, so it becomes harder for us to uphold and enforce is a strong word, but to uphold and emphasise those associations in the way that we would seek. And I think that's when we look to the state, and we can have a tendency to look to law to do just that. Well, you know, in Sydney, where I live, one can go to the beach on a Saturday or on a Sunday and you see a surf club in action. And I think the surf club is a very interesting way in which discipline is instilled, respect for elders, respect for the elements. That's a really wonderful thing. It's great to see these kids doing it. It makes me really wish I'd been a kid in Australia before I was a kid here. Surf club's a great example, but what about institutions that are actually struggling to foster those sorts of associations? And religion is one of them. Religious associations are struggling. Who's going to instill virtues in the next generation of people? Who's going to set the standard for community behaviour that we need so much? When we see that not happening, I think some people think, right, it's time to have a law to set this or a law to set that. And I don't think we need it, because I think we've actually been a very successful country, and I think we have maintained successfully for a very long time high standards of association, high standards of community value. We need to maintain those.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks. I am one of those who's constantly telling the Grand Mufti where he's wrong and where he should comply with Australian law and not preach against it. One of the things that I come across quite often is I'm finding a lot of Christians are actually quite frightened. They're quite frightened that if we start bringing in regulations, for instance, with respect to regulation of mosques and the social impact. We're talking about changing planning laws so that social impact of mosques and Islamic schools, for instance, are allowed to be taken into account by local governments in a way that they're currently not. I'm constantly getting backwash from Christians, and quite a lot of them who are in power, either local, state or federal government, who are concerned that if we bring in and push these regulations that it will be used against Christians and Christian churches. And so we're saying in response, well, when was the last time a terrorist emanated from your local church of anything other than Islam? So we don't think that Christians and Christian churches would fall foul of any of these regulations. Obviously it would be a small hurdle. So I am coming to a question. We are losing the battle right now, and the people who we loosely term left-wing have taken over our schools and most of our higher education institutions. Also, they're going into the infant schools now with what they loosely term safe schools and so forth. And so one of the things we seem to be unable to do is unite. As an example, the CFMEU person who was threatening inspectors and their families the other day, Bill Shorten felt forced to decry him, but of course they'll take the union money and they'll take the votes come election time. What we're doing wrong, it seems to me, is not uniting so that we harvest all conservative votes, the whole breadth of Christianity and other conservatives and people who you label as seculars and so forth.
Question time.
So the question is, how do you think we can go about harvesting those votes and uniting in the way that we're going to have to if we want to defeat this lefty progressiveness?
Thank you.
Gosh, thank you a lot there. That's an interesting series of issues that you've raised. One of the things I encourage in the course of writing mainly, but also when in meetings with people, is the importance for the Muslim community of Australia to demonstrate that that Australian Muslims are Australians who are Muslims, not Muslims who have to be living in Australia broadly. And I think that is a very important step that needs to be taken, because the unspoken feeling, I think, in many quarters is a fear of Islam, and yet to say that can bring real reprobation upon one. But I think people are concerned, and it's changing the impact of a few radicalized young men, and however many people stand behind them. In Britain, there are 23,000 apparently who are of concern to the security services, but their behavior is changing even in a cosmetic way. The face of our cities with concrete bollards being placed up now, and it's changing the way we go about living. I think, in a way, working with planning laws is an understandable way for councils to go about their work and for citizens to express their concern. But what we really need to do is address the concerns that underlie that. And I think it's about, in the broadest terms, I think it's a feeling that actually Islam is not compatible with the values and the principles of a secular liberal democracy. Now, what do Christians do about that? And these are very fraught things, and I want to see, as I said earlier, in this book, really, I want to say to everybody, come on, we can do better than this. This is not how we should be living. We all need to be pulling on the same bit of rope. And I've got to know in the last couple of years some Turkish Muslims in Australia who are totally committed to that. They value life in Australia because of what's happening to them in Turkey and family members caught up in Turkey. There are a lot of people who value that. And there are a lot of Muslims who want nothing more than to enjoy life in a free country where they can go about their daily life. I think they are often let down by their leadership, who say one thing and yet seem to do another. Say one thing and yet sometimes mean another. And I think there are two things that we can do. First, I think, is be politically active. And one of the groups I really have a lot of admiration for in this country is the Australian Christian Lobby, which, and you know, you can take issue on various points of doctrine with the ACL and say, well, you know, that's not the way I understand the Christian faith and that's not how I would interpret the Bible. Never mind, that can be set aside, because what the ACL is doing in a very courageous way, is making sure that Christian voices are heard and that members of Parliament in every state and territory know about the concerns of Christians. That's the first thing, I think, is to raise political awareness and be politically engaged. The second thing, I think, is to uphold and be committed to the principle of religious liberty. So, for example, with religious violence and violence perpetrated in the name of Allah in particular. I mean, we all know Christians have waged acts of war in the past, and in a sense, violence is endemic in most religious traditions in some ways or at some time. We know that.
The ones with people in them.
Yeah, that's right. I've just lost my train of thought when you said that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, that's right. But so what do we need to do to counter fears about or concerns about religious violence? We need to talk about what these religions teach. I mean, and I'll just take Islam as another example, because it doesn't cause me to be angry, but it causes me to be frustrated. How often are we told that something is a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of what the Quran says? And yet there it says, you know, the unbeliever must be treated a certain way, and we have phrases like striking the neck. Mm-hmm. Some people take that literally, others don't. We're told that's not what it means. Well, what does it mean? Let's talk about that. Now, in order to do that, in the way we might talk about Christian doctrines of justification by faith alone, in order to talk about that, we need to be free to talk about religion. Whereas I think often there is a tendency to shut down debate about Islam by reverting to the language of Islamophobia. You know, you raise a question, you say something, you're an Islamophobe. And nobody wants to be branded an Islamophobe or anything phobe, a homophobe. So we've got to stand up, I think, for the principle of religious freedom. And that's not just religious people. I encourage people who are not religious to understand that as citizens of a secular, liberal democracy, freedom of religion is a fundamental human right. We all need to defend it. I want to say one more thing. I think a country that does this better than many, many countries, and perhaps better than most countries, for all its faults, is the United States, where freedom of speech means that anyone can say anything, and that any view can be countered by somebody else. When I tell American friends that it's law in this country that you can't offend or humiliate somebody, they just look at me with astonishment. So I think the United States has a model of civil society from which we could learn a great deal. I'm certainly not saying we should become more like the United States, but if you're asking for an example where these sorts of things can be talked about openly, and Christians and Muslims and Jews can take a principled stand on matters that are extremely important to them, it's the United States.
And we are seeing an attack on that in the United States. You just have to see, you know, the opportunities for roasting marshmallows outside Berkeley University frequently to know that the attack of free speech results in riots in the streets and, you know, setting cars on fire.
Well, there's something very odd going on university campuses in many Western countries. Certainly American campuses are in the grip of an astonishing intellectual storm.
But it's a badge of bravery and courage of your convictions, I think. It actually smacks of certainty if you're able to invite a critic to say whatever he wants, because you know that your ideas have an ability to withstand scrutiny. And it smacks of a great degree of cowardice and uncertainty if you're even afraid to have the conversation that perhaps an idea might be wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.